He's sort of implying I'm kind of an evil communist by asking this, and I'm kind of a communist anyways, but, he thinks that it's...
An Alberta-based legislative reporter with 660 News in Calgary has been verified as a literal communist. Tom Ross has admitted on a podcast, one that has close ties to those in the Antifa movement, that he is in fact a communist.
He's sort of implying I'm kind of an evil communist by asking this, and I'm kind of a communist anyways, but, he thinks that it's...
Now that podcast has about 20-something views, so I'm guessing he didn't expect you to hear this. Tom Ross later goes on to call people who grew up in Calgary and Alberta brainwashed.
For those that don't ask the questions, they grew up or are living in Calgary or other parts of Alberta for most of their life. So they're sort of, it's kind of a tough thing to say, but I think they're sort of brainwashed in some ways.
Now, you might know Tom Ross from his spiteful coverage of Jason Kenney and Alberta, and now it all makes so much sense. He hates Alberta because it isn't a communist hellhole like Toronto. He is spiteful that we elect conservative governments, and that is why he was in the pockets of the NDP throughout their entire term in government. Tom Ross has been hounding Jason Kenney for a Green New Deal at all of his press conferences, and a video of the Premier verbally slapping this 20-something yuppie went viral just a few weeks ago.
With the oil and gas market taking such a hit, when do you start thinking about a full-on transition away from traditional fossil fuels? And when you're talking to American representatives, for example, are you talking to anybody who advocates for a Green New Deal?
As Minister Nixon has said, Alberta has our Technology Innovation and Emissions Reduction Program, which invests in technology to reduce the environmental impact and carbon intensity of our energy production. When you talk about the Green New Deal, listen, our focus is on getting people back to work in Alberta, not pie-in-the-sky ideological schemes. We are actually not trying to amplify, but to fight back against the political agenda of the Green left that has been trying to landlock Alberta energy. So we're not going to cooperate with the folks that are trying to shut down Canada's single largest subsector. You're talking here, that kind of question in the middle of an economic crisis from a Calgary-based media outlet really, frankly, throws me for a loop. Sounds like you're reporting for the Tyee or something.
Now, while licking his wounds, Ross pretended like this was a coup. He really showed up the Premier. Some people bought that because they thought Ross was acting in good faith as a journalist, just an unbiased lad asking an innocent question about saving the planet, no less. Now we know that question didn't come from a place of naivety. He was a communist, and he was pushing his own hidden agenda the whole time. Now, as I said, I imagine Tom Ross didn't expect the world to hear him admit that he subscribes to an ideology that systematically killed over 100 million people throughout the last century, but I just can't get enough of this clip.
Sort of implying I'm kind of an evil communist by asking this, and I'm kind of a communist anyways, but, he thinks that it's...
You have a right as a viewer and consumer of news to know who is giving you and producing the news. Tom Ross is a communist, and you might have been inadvertently listening to his propaganda for years. Communists believe in forcibly seizing private property at gunpoint. If you dissent, you will be shot. If you go to Tiananmen Square, you will be flattened by tanks, and all evidence will be destroyed. If you're growing a crop to feed your family, it will be taken from you by the government to the point where you are feeding rats to your young children to help them survive through the Holodomor. Communism is bad. It is evil. And that is an objective statement. History has shown us that it is an ideology of dictators, death, and destruction. It just doesn't make sense how Tom Ross could subscribe to such an evil thing. Now, when I told you back during the Alberta election that the NDP candidate, Anne McGrath, was a communist candidate at one point, why do you think Tom Ross never mentioned that little factoid? You'd think he'd be singing it from the rooftops. But you know as well as I do that communists rely on hiding information from you so that they can secure power. Commies tend to not be great candidates for journalism in developed democracies. Now, of course, McGrath ended up losing that election by a hair after Rebel News was the only outlet to publish that fact, the fact that she was a communist, during the Cold War, and I'm glad that we did it. Calgarians deserved to know, just like they deserve to know whose voice they're hearing on the radio waves and on their news feeds. Tom Ross is a communist. Now, what is more horrifying than that is for every one of these commies in the mainstream media that we find out and expose, how many more are hiding in the shadows? Thank you for checking out our coverage here. Now, Tom Ross gets into press conferences like it's his day job. Even though he's a communist, Jason Kenney allows him into the press briefing room or onto the calls right now. Justin Trudeau is not doing the same for his opponents, us at Rebel News. We try to get into the places where we can ask him tough questions, reasonable questions, but he doesn't let us. If you go to letusreport.ca, you can see the full story of me getting dragged out by my arm from a Trudeau press conference.